Welcome to the About Sex podcast, where we would discuss
macaroni and cheese.
Well, some sort of pasta. But I hope. My name is Josh, and with me, as always, is my lovely wife, Angela Skirtu. Tell us who you are, Angela.
I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and an ASEX certified sex therapist. Who's our guest today, Josh?
Oh, our guest is Nicholas Maio. MSPSY, BCBA, LBA. There's a lot of letters after your name.
I know. There's actually more letters after my name than in my name.
I noticed that, yeah.
Letters make you cool.
So that's a licensed behavioral analyst and sex therapist, and you're in Practicum with Linda Weiner.
Yes.
Angela actually was trained by her as well.
Yep.
And you're the co-owner and CEO of Empowered, a center for sexuality, LLC in Clayton.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Opened about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. So what do you do? What are we here to talk about?
Well, I utilize a combined approach of a lot of different methods, but predominantly I am a behavior analyst. And so as a behavior analyst, I want to talk about how sexual behavior can be addressed through applied behavior analysis. I think a lot of people don't think applied behavior analysis when they think of sex.
Can you, because some of our people will not know what that
Absolutely.
is, give me a brief...
I don't know.
Like, what's applied
Josh
behavior?
is raising his hand.
If Josh doesn't know, we know the world doesn't know.
Okay.
What is a behavioral analyst?
So applied behavior analysis is not just providing therapy, but setting objective and measurable goals, taking and tracking data, graphing it, proving that the techniques are working on an objective level.
So it's very research.
It's like tracking it the
It's
whole time.
extremely empirical, yes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Research driven.
That's what we love here.
We love
evidence.
that. Research.
I don't like opinions. Keep those at the door.
You're allowed to have opinions, but we want facts or cool stories. Cool stories are allowed.
I don't allow opinions, but go. We allow informed opinions. That's what we say.
There we go. So applied behavior analysis, because we do the level of data tracking that we do, it allows us to know at any point in time if what we're working on isn't working.
Right.
And so we can then change the approach. We also tend to...
Are you working with large groups, or are you working with individuals?
So predominantly it's individuals. I do have a couple of couples on my caseload that I'm working with as well. Typically, applied behavior analysis is used for life and functional skills, and a lot of people just don't think of sex or sexuality as life
skill?
Functional.
It's a very important life skill.
It is.
I would say everybody needs it because nobody learns that particular skill. Or if you do, it's through trial by fire.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it can burn, definitely.
It can burn a lot.
Or for a lot of my clients, it's Google.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, not just,
Many
of them actually do
a lot
that
of
way.
young people learn through the internet about sex.
Oh, that's
And
really
they
cool.
have some amazing misconceptions.
Yeah.
Well, because
It's like, wait, they don't like it on their face? No, they don't. That is not what a lady likes.
there are some women who are okay with it, but I'd say it's a small percentage of the overall population.
Anyway, move it on.
Play it safe.
Roll with the joke.
All right. So anyhow, you work with people on the spectrum.
Yes. I do a lot of work with people on the autism spectrum. Growing up, I did not know that I was on the spectrum. I just thought I was really weird.
You seem pretty normal, though.
I appreciate that, I guess.
No, you seem like a normal guy.
I kind of like, well, what is normal, right?
Right.
What I say is nobody's normal.
Yeah.
Exactly. Not being normal is normal. But growing up, my parents, they were aware that I had been recommended for autism testing, but they also were aware that anytime I had any excuse to get out of something, I would take it.
Oh, okay,
wow.
yeah.
And they did not want me to have an autism diagnosis to fall back on.
Right.
So I did not know.
They didn't tell you.
No, they did not. And at the time, I wasn't technically diagnosed, so it wasn't like following me around or anybody asking me about it. It actually wasn't until I started working with clients on the spectrum as an adult that I was like, hey, some of this is kind of marrying up with some of what I
Wait,
experienced.
so you self-diagnosed?
No.
No.
I was working at a large agency, and I was able to have an ADOS assessment, which is a testing assessment for autism.
But you had some ideas about it because you'd been a therapist for a while.
Yeah, well, I was in Practicum.
In Practicum.
So I'd been around
And what is
autism.
that for layperson?
Practicum's like an internship that is...
For therapists, yeah.
yes.
But that's not paid for therapists.
Yeah. Oh,
There
yeah.
you go.
Pretty much you're a slave
We get our
for 2 years.
hours and, do the work we need to do. But
Yeah.
then, we're slave labor for a while.
Yeah.
Luckily, the agency I was with, they were really, they were kind, and they were able to work with me. So they actually did pay me for any side stuff that I did
Oh, nice.
while I was there. Yeah.
That's
Okay.
cool.
So then, you thought you might have it, so you had somebody do an assessment for you?
Yes, and actually it was funny. She asked me, why would you want to pursue this if you're already functioning as an adult? And I said, well, I still have challenges, and I would just kind of like to know, especially because I had this kind of weird upbringing in childhood where I was having meltdowns a lot. And, if my shoelaces didn't form symmetrical on my shoes after I tied them, like both loops had to be the same
It'd be
size.
perfectly
They
even.
had to lay down flat. So those kind of OCD tendencies would lead to complete meltdowns. There was a lot of fighting in school. Where kids would be picking on me, or I would perceive that they were picking on me.
Interesting. So sometimes they weren't? It was just...
Sometimes they weren't.
And it was just your perception. You weren't able to gauge necessarily why they were saying what they were saying?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And you, in your questionnaire, it says you take things kind of literally, right?
I do. I take things ridiculously literally. Earlier when you said mac and cheese joke, I was kind of worried. I was like, am I going to be mac and cheese on this show? Like, is that what's going to happen? Or if we're going to eat mac and cheese, are we going to joke about it? Because that sounds wonderful. I'll do
I
that.
know. Well, next time you come, I'll have to bring a big bowl of mac and
Bring a big
cheese.
bowl of mac and cheese.
Yeah.
One thing that I've learned
I
as
do
a
like mac and
pretty
cheese.
literal thinker is to kind of hold off for a moment and grab more context
Yeah.
clues.
Wait and see where they're going with it.
Yes, it's really important
Not
not
jump
to
to
be
conclusions.
assumptive.
Yeah.
And on the autism spectrum, I think we're either too assumptive at times or just unwilling to even face something at other times. So I try and find that like middle ground. Context clues are so important.
Yeah.
So important.
Okay. Interesting.
So you kind of have to learn, or maybe even on your way growing up, you actually had to learn to like slow yourself down and look for more context. Maybe read. Did you have to teach yourself to read nonverbal cues?
So I had, like I said, I'm what would be considered very,
Very
high
high
functioning. So I had some ability to read cues. I think I overread into a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And then there were things like I was really easy to manipulate. So if somebody was acting friendly but doing really mean things to me, I was
You
like,
wouldn't
this
know.
is my best friend.
Yeah. Not cool.
Not cool.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons that I wanted to go and do what I do, which is specializing in sexual behavior and now also getting my practicum in sex therapy, is growing up, I was very confused about a lot of elements of sex and sexuality. And luckily, I had really cool parents.
Yeah.
They talked to me whenever I had a question. They were
actually
like,
talked to
They
you?
did.
Education.
Wow.
We love education.
Nobody does that.
My mom, she has a master's in teen and adolescent psychology.
Oh, that's why.
And
Gotcha.
she's really awesome. And I think that helped. She also taught charm school, and she would have me come and sit in, but I was not one of the girls in charm school.
Yeah,
But
clearly.
I got a lot of those kinds of lessons. And then also at home, a lot of things that would be considered more neurotypical behavior were very reinforced. And anything that I did that was what would be considered more autistic behavior, my parents would kind of try and find something else for me to do or a way to get around it.
Yeah. They would try to help you with it.
Yes.
Well, and she has a master's in working with teens, so she probably perfect
Absolutely.
person for that. Yeah.
I also think that consistency in parenting is extremely important for people who are on the spectrum. And
Yeah, you want fairness as a kid.
Absolutely.
justice.
Well, And you want to know what the rules are.
Yeah.
You need to know what
Right.
the rules are. You need to know consequence and
I think a lot of kids
I think
in
every
general-
kid needs that. That makes them
Yeah.
actually feel more secure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like with our daughter, she's actually very well behaved because we're very consistent with her. And that's it. It's consistency.
Consistency
Well,
is huge.
I think it becomes, I mean, just to put it out there, like sometimes it's when parents, the difference between parents trying to control their kids and the parents actually trying to teach their kids how to be an adult. When I think you're trying to teach them, you come up with the rules that are similar to rules we have as adults, and you leave out the other stuff that just doesn't matter. And what we find is we avoid certain power struggles that really are just about, I want to
Like
control
over what
you.
they're eating.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Choose your
but-
battles and let
Yeah.
them grow up to be an individual.
Exactly.
My parents
That's a good
were
idea.
right.
So you know,
I'm
parent
trying to raise.
techniques.
See, a lot of people tries to raise children. I'm trying to raise an adult. Like my daughter, I want her to be an adult and functional.
We want her to have
and
empathy.
successful. And yes, to not be a terrible person.
Right.
Those are our goals.
So
Go on,
continue.
sorry.
We will cut you off
you're
all the
fine.
time.
You're fine. I was just throwing out there. I think another factor that played in too. My parents were both military, and so we had very
rigid structure, yeah.
Absolutely. So that was, I think, actually very beneficial for me in terms of functioning. And then, interestingly enough, I was considered weird, and kids knew that there was something up or weird about me. But it wasn't until I came out as gay that kids started accepting me, and they were like, "Oh, that's what's weird and
Now
different
they
about
get it."
you. That's why you're so anal retentive." Like they fell back on stereotypes of gay, and they somehow matched up with some of the stereotypes of autism.
Interesting.
So that was just interesting.
So maybe it's
how
just
that,
maybe just gay people who have autism stand out to other people.
quite possibly.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
There's an interesting. Everything's a spectrum. So
Yeah.
in some
Yeah.
ways, things fall over each
Sure.
other.
Kinsey has his own scale, yeah. Yeah.
So once I came out as gay, I started actually making real good friends who accepted me as
Awesome.
me, who recognized a lot of my traits and kind of moved forward with them. And it became more and more obvious seeing what was working for them and what was not working for them and what I wanted to do and what I did not want to do. And I also, through a lot of failed friendships, I learned a lot of lessons about what a friend truly is and what they're not.
Like characteristics they have.
Absolutely. You know, the give and take of friendship is very important. The equality. And then...
What is this equality you speak?
Well, that is the difference between a therapeutic relationship and a friendship, right? In a
Yeah.
therapeutic, we're all giving to the other person, but in a friendship, there should be a back and forth. And actually, some therapists struggle with that too.
right?
Because
But
we're so used to giving.
absolutely.
You're so giving.
No, I'm not
That's your
saying
biggest
that.
problem.
I'm
No, you're also super humble. That's your other problem.
I'm so humble.
Right? No, you're good. So
He likes to make fun of me.
She's
That's
the
just what we
humblest.
do.
I do. I totally make fun of you all the time.
so
It's fun.
theater, though, also. So once I
Going
had
into
made...
acting, yeah?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Once I made a group of friends, they were kids who got into drama, and they were like, "Oh, you know, you're gay. You should totally
You
get
should
into
be in
drama."
musical theater, yeah.
Right. So
Just took you along all the stereotypes.
I know, but I went with it, and in
You
some
rolled with
ways,
it.
I'm kind of glad I did.
Yeah.
Because theater really did end up being very, very helpful.
Yeah.
Learning to have to improvise was crazy different and so important. And so I incorporate as much role playing and improvisation as I can into my therapy. A lot of behavior analysts start where a client is and will make as many tiny little steps as they can to get them up to where they need to be. I definitely agree with that approach. That's a very standard thing in applied behavior analysis. But what I try and do is I try and make sure that my steps are as large as they can be without being too hard on the clients.
Yeah.
And I move as quickly as I can into role plays. And I generalize things by making them varied and random and real. I think that that's an important component to helping things generalize to the real world. And if my clients are going to be out there learning with me about dating and sex and all of these things.
You'll teach them how to like ask a girl out and
Absolutely.
how to flirt?
Flirting skills. I have programmed flirting versus harassment.
Tell us more about that.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, like really.
But
like,
actually, a lot of young,
I'm
even
sure-
outside of the spectrum, I think a lot of young men and women would love something
right.
like that.
Like I whenever people are on, I always try to get them to talk about that because I think a
Absolutely.
lot of young men struggle with, and women struggle with putting themselves out there.
For sure.
So how do you ask a girl out?
Yeah.
Or
Right.
how do you flirt and not harass them? I like that.
So you brought up something that is important too, is that applied behavior analysis is not just for autism. These things can work for anybody who wants to come and see me. Unfortunately, insurance, for whatever reason, typically only covers ABA for clients with autism because it's the most effective treatment for them.
Yeah.
But it's also oftentimes the most effective treatment in any population. It was developed to be used in any population. So to get back into the actual flirting versus harassment program, it starts out with probing questions. I want to get an idea of their understanding of flirting versus harassment. Then I have them watch some videos. I see if they can tact or label examples of flirting versus harassment. Then I will actually role play right in front of them. If I were to do this to a girl's bottom, like, what would this be, flirting or harassment?
Most of the time, harassment.
Right?
With that one.
So especially if I
Unless they ask for it.
if I go right up to her and I haven't met her, and the first thing I do is that's definitely harassment.
Nice to meet you. Slap.
So
No.
I get that
Bad touch.
that baseline awareness, and baseline awareness is foundational concept in ABA. You need to know their baseline so that you can get them from there to their goal. You don't want to teach them stuff they already know. They're going to get bored.
Right.
They're going to check out.
Right.
So then I do a series of actual targets, is what we call them in ABA. Targets are either questions or labeling things or actions, actual behaviors that indicate that the client is moving forward and making their goals. So the targets always lead up towards the goal. So my initial targets are some examples of phrasing, different things that are phrasing. And then we start talking about body language, subtle cues. I only teach flirting and harassment after I've already taught body language and after I've already taught about consent. So I start to apply those lessons in, and I start to work with that. So I have them kind of basically define harassment, define flirting. And flirting to me should be casual, consensual, and enjoyable.
Yeah.
And that's
people
kind of
should smile at the end of it,
Yeah.
right?
or at least, not feel like they were harassed.
Right.
Yeah.
Not feel
that
assaulted.
doesn't mean
They
they
might
can't
not
say,
enjoy
no, I'm
it.
not interested.
Sometimes people are like not
Right.
interested
Not
in
interested,
it. But
yeah.
That's
at
okay.
least,
But they shouldn't run away.
yes. And so I teach them about getting in there and using those skills about conversations, which we hopefully have already worked on if they needed that help. And we start working on back and forth where we will role play that we're in a flirting situation. And in that, I always pause if things start to go too far.
Yeah.
I have a very staunch pause policy where anytime I'm working with a client, if I say pause, we pause.
Yeah.
So I check in with them anytime that they're giving answers that are not going to help them in their lives, such as a blatantly incorrect response. I'll check in, I'll say pause. What could be wrong with that?
Yeah.
And I let them start to kind of go through it too, versus feeding them answers.
Right.
If I have to feed them answers, I'll do it in as little a chunk as I can. So maybe a little bit of verbal prompting.
Right.
I try really hard not to model if I don't have to, because the more they come up with it on their own, the more likely they are to retain this.
Yeah. It
But
was their idea.
Absolutely.
That's what you're trying to get.
And I also, even if they get it once or right once, I don't consider that target mastered. They have to get it right 3 days in a row the first time it's presented.
Okay. So you're tracking that.
Absolutely.
Interesting. So what else do you track? Like, do you track everything about? Do you follow them home and like listen at the door to when they're going to sleep?
So it depends on the situation. I have at the beginning, I start with a behavioral assessment, and the behavioral assessment is where are you? Where do you want to be? What are the problem behaviors that are standing in your way right now? So any of those problematic behaviors, excuse me, I try to track. And self-report is really tricky, and people might change their self-report to impress the therapist or to not feel bad about themselves, or they might change their self-report because their perceptive or their perception of what they're doing is maybe a little off.
Right.
So I try not to do self-report measures on anything that is a particularly intensive problem behavior. If my clients are living at home, I'll have their parents monitor data. If my clients are partnered, I'll have their partner monitor data. If my clients are in a residential living facility, which a lot of them are, then I have their staff take the data.
So it's better to have somebody else track them so they're honest. They're honest recordings.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I also test. So if I have multiple people taking data, I test for their consistency by anytime I go out, I do what's called IOA testing, which is the observer agreement. It's IOA is internal assessment of observers. You're checking to make sure that they are observing the same way. They're coming up with the exact same results, or at least you want 90% plus.
Sure.
So I do that, make sure that their IOA scores are 90% or above, so that I can make sure that my data is as accurate as possible. Cool. Now, the self-report measures that I'll do are things that are like a little bit simpler. If they exercise, they'll put a check that day that they exercised for, so long. If they made an attempt to talk to a girl and they were able to get through at least 2 sentences, if that's their goal, then they can track that, because there might not be somebody with them in that exact moment, or somebody who's tracking the data maybe a couple aisles over and not hear what's actually being said. So those types of things I will have them do self-report. But typically for the problematic behaviors, I have other people do that.
Yeah.
And I've helped with problematic behaviors ranging from putting a penis inside of a toaster and hot
That's
oatmeal.
not where it's supposed to go.
No. From those types of things to rape-like behaviors, to behaviors that are just kind of getting in the way of romantic goals, like a client who can't help himself because he has years of doing this behavior repetitiously, but will wipe boogers and then kind of play with them.
Yeah.
That's something that's going to inhibit
Turn
your
people
ability
off.
to date, right? So
Yeah, people don't like boogers.
so those types of things.
Especially if it's all over your hand. You're like, hi, nice to meet you.
Right. Well, but in this client's case, likes the boogers. So like, why doesn't everybody else like it? So
Right,
we
he's
have
a
to
big fan.
we have to get
Yeah.
in there
Right.
and teach an alternative replacement behavior for if you want to entertain yourself. So I do try to find what we call functional replacements. Things
Well, they have
that
spinners, so that's probably good.
I'm not a fan of the spinners.
You don't like the
I don't like
Really?
the spinners. No.
Why?
I tried them when I first heard about them, and I tried them, meaning I didn't even use it with the client. I was like, I want to see what this can do for me before I try to use it with anybody, because there's no long-term data on the fidget spinners.
Sure, they're new.
So,
Yeah.
so I'm like, okay, what can I do? And so I start playing with it, and I realize, oh my gosh, this is completely visually stimulating. This is tactile, somewhat stimulating, but it's got my eyes on this. And when my eyes are on something and I'm really visually stimulated, the rest of the world starts to go away.
Oh, yeah.
And so
you totally get engrossed in it.
you do. And so
Yeah.
instead of fidgeting,
That's why I had to stop
you're
doing it while I was
using-
driving.
oh God.
You were doing it while you were driving?
No, I wasn't doing that. Go on.
Oh my God.
But the fidget spinner becomes an escape, and it becomes a replacement behaviors for other escape maintained behaviors. And escaping from a situation doesn't necessarily teach
Make it
you
better.
a skill.
Yeah.
Learning how to cope with the situation, make room for uncomfortable feelings. That comes from ACT mindfulness. Making room for those uncomfortable feelings and actually getting through. That's a skill.
Okay.
So if I do use a fidget, I'll use something that is like in their hand and kept kind of low so that they're still in the situation. And I teach them to use it in session. Then I start having them using it, and whoever is helping them track data would also be tracking whether or not they're using it versus engaging in the other behavior.
Okay, cool. That's interesting.
So you said you use songs sometimes. What songs have you used to help people?
Well, I had a gentleman a few years back when I was first getting started, and he was engaging in a lot of maladaptive behaviors. He's the gentleman who had stuck his penis in hot oatmeal. And the other behavior that was kind of prominent was an intimidating kind of rape-like behavior where he was trying to force staff to have sex with him or force his roommates to have sex with him.
Sure.
So I got in there, and even though the behaviors were very much adult, the mindset of the client was very much from his childhood. And so I'm looking at his reinforcers, things that he likes, that he can earn, that he will enjoy. I do a lot of reinforcement breaks. I say, if you're doing good work, you should be rewarding yourself. So a lot of that, because self-love is important, right? So I try to figure out like what his reinforcers could be, and I'm noticing everything was either Barney, Sesame Street, and then there's Mary Poppins. And so I'm like, this is interesting. So I spend usually my first session with a client who is what they would call, and I hate the term, but lower functioning. I will do side by side. So I let them engage in reinforcing activities for 2 whole hours while I just try to be near them and engage in similar activities. And if they're doing something very sensory, I'll try and find the value in it. That helps me understand the client. It helps the client kind of feel comfortable with me because I'm engaging in behavior similar to theirs. And I'm not asking anything of them initially. And what I noticed with him was he kept popping on a couple of particular parts of videos. And so there was a Barney song about the shapes. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. I like this. He seems very receptive to that. And then there was a particular Mary Poppins song, Chim Chimney, which he seemed really, really receptive to. So as I was teaching him what's called a task analysis, it's a breakdown of the different steps that you would use in a skill. So I'm teaching him a task analysis for solo sex, all the way from going into his room to the actual ejaculation, to coming out of his room, washing his hands with his pants up, of course.
Sure.
Washing his hands.
Keeping Kleenex by the bed.
So we worked on all of this. But as I was initially presenting the task analysis, he was just so, he was very into it at first. But then when we got to the point of actual solo sex, actual masturbatory action, he completely lost his jazz. He was like, I like this. Like, this is how I perceived it, was very like, I like this, but only for a minute. This is work after a point, and I'm not going to do work.
Meaning masturbation is work?
Yeah. Because anything
that was there is a work. Yeah,
anything that was like repetitious and took more than a couple minutes, he didn't want to do.
No.
And that was across the board. I interviewed staff. I interviewed other educators.
He gets too bored too quick.
Yes. So I was like, well, the only thing that seems to hold his attention for like 5 solid minutes is Mary Poppins.
There you go.
So I started to take my task analysis, and I would sing it to the tune of Mary Poppins as he was, or Chim Chimney as he was doing this.
Why don't you sing us a couple bars?
Okay. Stroke up and down, go all around. It doesn't matter. You're playing around. You could stroke here or there would be fine. It doesn't matter. It's safe when it's mine. So those kinds of...
Bravo!
This is awesome. I love it.
Up and down.
Right?
Yeah, that's going to be in my head all day.
You're going to sing that all day, Josh.
All day
You
long.
could record that and get millions of views.
Oh, yeah.
I also had a client who was hoarding sperm.
Oh, no.
So,
where was he keeping it?
Everywhere. In his room. Only in his room, but everywhere in his room. So,
Like drawers or just on things?
on things, it wasn't in drawers, but most of his things were out, so it was on most of his things.
Okay.
Like his clothes, he might show up with stuff on, and
he typically wouldn't show up with it on his clothes. But we're talking like you walked in, there was a layer of crust over the room that you couldn't even pick books up off the shelf.
Okay. That's bad. Yeah.
So any area that didn't already have sperm or semen, he was going to ejaculate there and get everything kind of covered. And so when I first went in, I thought that the goal was covering the room. Like I was like, oh, he is trying to cover this room. But again, this is what's beautiful about behavior analysis is that you do that functional behavior assessment. You're interviewing, you're observing, you're doing what you can. Obviously, I could not observe him engaging in solo sex. So with him, it was more talking to his mom about it, talking to his brother about it, his father about it. And then once he was comfortable with me, kind of getting into that with him. And it turned out that he was avoiding messes and didn't want to add to the mess. So he didn't want to double up on layers.
I see. He was spreading it out.
Yes, so that it would be easier to clean one day when he got to it.
He was literally spreading the load.
Wow.
Yes.
But then he was procrastinating a little bit when it came to cleaning up.
Which is common on the spectrum. So he wanted help, but he had been really afraid to bring it up. I knew better than to bring it up on my own because when his mom and his brother had brought it up, he had shut them out. They weren't allowed in his room and hadn't been in there in over 6 months. So they did not know how bad it really was because they saw it at its onset. So once I actually got to go into the room with him and using the motivation was that he wanted to get a girlfriend. And if you're going to have a girlfriend, she can't be coming over and seeing your entire layer of crusted up room.
She won't like that. Yeah.
Most likely.
We don't respond well to it.
Nope. They don't like it on their face and they don't like it all over the bedroom either.
So with him, I knew that he liked Disney parodies. He would YouTube Disney parodies. And he also liked film parodies and other things. So parodies was like a thing. So they're fun. They are. They're fun. So I took a Disney song, Let It Go, and I made it all about ejaculation and all about cleaning it up and about having the forethought to prep so that cleanup is easier. So
plan for it.
Yeah,
the
so
explosion.
whether it's a bucket or a sock, have something that you can ejaculate into.
But clean the bucket out occasionally.
Right?
Yeah.
So that song actually worked really well. He got...
Why don't you sing a few bars? Let it go.
You're willing.
Liz, let it flow?
I can try. Okay. It's been a long... This intervention was years ago. Okay. Something white came out of me tonight, and now it's nowhere to be seen. I had me some solo action, but now I've got a lot to clean.
I like that. I like it. That's awesome.
And so the chorus, though, was, I think, where it was at. So the chorus was like, let it flow, let it flow. Don't hold it back anymore. Let it flow, let it flow. Just remember to close that door. Rub it bare or use a sock, they say. Get your handball on.
Handball?
But prep to ensure ease of wipe away.
Bravo. I love that.
I love it. Plenty of people can learn from this.
And if it helps them learn, like,
absolutely,
yes, sing along. Yeah, that's awesome.
So once he was kind of accepting of the idea that he could prepare, and he heard the song and he actually liked the song, he posted it on his fridge, and I was like, that might not be the best place for it. So we had to work on that, but he really liked the song.
Yeah, I do.
So
I don't know if it's fridge worthy, but
maybe it is.
He told me that at full length it's fridge worthy. But he told me that he felt that he was ready to move into actually cleaning the room. So I went with him and I spent 3 hours cleaning it up. We got everything as clean as we could. Had to throw some things away, but we made a plan. And so he was to ejaculate into a sock, place the sock immediately into the laundry hamper, and then whenever he wanted to do the laundry, he could just take his laundry hamper and dump it out right into the washer.
Yeah, and if you're a parent of a teenager, never touch it. Just dump it out. Like, don't worry about
or teach them to
splitting
clean
up
their own laundry if you can.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
my goal.
Absolutely.
But yeah, any teenager, don't touch their socks.
Well, but you know what? I even know adults and couples who don't have systems or strategies for how they clean up with each other. Like before they had kids, they would just kind of do it haphazardly. I'll do it sometime, you'll do it sometime. But then when you have children...
Meaning sex, or are you talking about
I'm talking about
laundry?
cleaning. I'm talking about chores.
okay.
That like when
Why?
they have children, suddenly they don't have the system, and there's all these extra chores. And
Yeah.
so I've done a similar thing with couples where I'm teaching them the steps of like developing a process. So it's so interesting. But I mean, you're just even at the very basic level, you know, like here's what you do when you are masturbating.
Absolutely. And
It's cool.
It's always important to remind people that they have choices, and that I'm not there to control their behavior. I'm not there to tell them what to do. I'm there to provide them options. When we find one that works, I'm there to help them grow in that option so that they can grow towards their goals.
That's awesome.
That's really cool.
So you yourself had a little issue with solo sex when you were younger. Tell us a little bit about that.
I use this as an example when I do some of my public speaking, and I'm emphasizing the importance of using actual terminology, especially when you're working with people on the spectrum or literal thinkers in general.
You want to use literal terms. Very clear.
It cuts down on so much confusion, and it can help them report abuse, and I mean, for so many reasons. But my own experience that I like to draw upon came from when we were first learning about solo sex at school, and of course it was masturbation. And I had heard a couple of different phrases, but the one that really kind of stuck in my head was "beat your meat." And so that was also kind of seconded by "spank your monkey." So I was like, okay, solo sex or masturbation at the time. I was like, masturbation is where you beat yourself up, and eventually it feels really good.
Oh, no.
I went home, and as weird as it may seem to people, and even to myself today, I sat there and I tried really hard to engage in this pleasurable activity that was only hurting me.
So were you punching your genitals, or just in general your body?
No, punching my genitals, trying to slap them like
Spank
a spank.
the monkey,
and getting very, very frustrated because it would actually...
Because you're hitting it, that's why.
Well, and it would start to get erect, and then I was like, oh, this is going places. So
I didn't know that
really
it would
start
work
punching
if
it like a punching bag, you know? And then it would... And then it
was it like... It's like one of those bags where it goes bump.
Pretty much, yes.
Like, no!
So I was like, well, surely this is a sign that it's working, right? Because punching bags are fun.
Punching bags
so
are fun,
like, this is what we're doing here.
You started doing a speed bag.
I hurt myself.
Yeah, clearly.
And so it wasn't until I went back to school, and, you know, I at first I was like, really, like, I'm not going to tell anybody about this. People started, of course, because this was just after the masturbation talk, people were still talking about these kinds of things. And a kid had motioned the up and down motion with the sort of half enclosed fist.
Right.
And I was like, that's an option? Like, what? That looks so much less violent.
It does seem less violent than punches.
So again, this is why role plays are better than verbals. So when I saw it, I was like, okay, I'm going to use this. And I don't know if I wrote it in my response to you, but they had paired it with phrasing too. So it was pulling your pud. And so I was like, oh, you pull on it. Like, that's a thing you can do. So I did it, and I had much more successful sexual experiences from there on out. I also learned very quickly not to take idioms seriously. And so
that's the problem with English, actually. I'm assuming people who are in other languages don't have that as much problem, because English has a lot of turns of phrase.
Yes.
We use it all the time.
And it's so confusing to literal thinkers.
It is, yeah.
So especially, like you said, for people who are trying to learn English, that can
second
be really
language,
tricky.
it can be really tough for them. Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's why it's
But
one of the harder languages.
I can
to
imagine in the dating process, there's a lot of so like people try to be nice, right? And so like even ghosting, for example, is a thing that people do.
Well, that's not nice.
Oh, yeah.
No, I
It's
can
not
imagine it
nice,
being
but people
confusing.
think it's kind of nice because
No,
they're
it's
like,
not.
Instead of just saying, "I'm not
Say,
interested."
Hey, we're not interested. Thank
Exactly.
you. But like if
I
you're a
hate
literal
that so
thinker,
much.
I mean, I could see you just continuing to send texts,
and then you're harassing.
and then you're harassing.
Absolutely. So
How many texts are harassing? Would you
so-
say 7 is too many?
I fall upon an empirically validated model.
Oh, there's one.
There is an empirically validated
That's
model
awesome.
that has rules for texting.
Wow.
It came from
I need to read
UCLA's
that. That's
Peers
awesome.
Institute for teaching people on the autism spectrum social skills.
That's
And they found that if you message somebody once and you don't get a reply, they might just have been busy and forgotten. They might have meant to get back to you and forgotten. Or, as does happen, it's rare, but we like to use it as an excuse sometimes, the text might have been dropped or just
Wrong
didn't
number,
go through, right?
Or yeah.
So in the event that happens, there's a good reason to at least send one more.
Sure.
So we say, wait, at least a couple hours to a couple days, send another one. But after 2 messages, and this is Peers copyrighted terminology, so I got to give them their props there. But the 2-message rule.
2 messages.
You do not send more than that, because if you've sent a second message, that's a reminder. If they needed a reminder, then they will get back to you.
Right.
If they did not need a reminder and they are ghosting you, then
Really, nothing good can come at that point. We're at the
Exactly.
3rd message. Either they're going to get annoyed if they were going to get back to you because you're
Absolutely.
harassing them, or if they weren't interested, well, now they just really want to block you.
absolutely.
Yeah. That's awesome. So
and
2 messages.
The 2-message rule. And
Don't forget that, guys.
even with the 2-message rule being something that is taught, it also, in applied behavior analysis, if it's not applied, if it doesn't actually happen in my clients' lives, then it's not actually therapeutic and it's just teaching.
Right.
And I can't do that. So with the 2-message rule, I actually check in on their texting and I will look at their text conversations
Yeah.
and check in for how many messages are they sending.
So you're guiding them with everything.
Oh yeah.
That's awesome.
I like to think of myself as Hitch for people
Hitch.
with
With
right. You remember Hitch with
Yeah.
Will Smith? I'm kind of like Hitch for people who have social anxieties, autism, or physical disabilities. But
awesome.
I use empirically validated methods versus
Versus just what you kind of know.
Yeah.
Versus the streets.
and I actually didn't come up with that, but one of my clients a few years ago, he said, "You're like Hitch for autism," and I was like, "I like that. I'll take that."
Yeah, that's awesome. So what other ways do you help them in their romantic life when it comes to, is it mostly communication that you're working with?
Communication's a big one. So
Yeah.
a lot of people who teach about communication, they don't teach the finer, more subtle cues. So I teach about things like if the person is blinking rapidly or if they stop blinking, there's probably either confusion or upset
surprise
at what
of
you
some
said.
sort, yeah.
Yep.
Like if they're like all of a sudden,
Absolutely.
or wide-eyed.
Yes. So I teach my clients to start recognizing for those things. First, I have them memorize a list of good signs, neutral signs, and bad signs. And then we start role playing. And so can they label them when I'm doing them? And then from there, actual like flirt role plays will occur. And I bring in an actress, or if they're into males, I will bring in an actor. So far, all of my clients who have gotten to that point have wanted a female actress. So bring in my actress, and she will engage in a flirt role play with them. And they know it's a role play. They know she's an actress. She is employed by my company and HIPAA trained. So she's allowed to be in the sessions. And so she comes in and she will start to flirt with them and let them flirt with her. But the amazing thing is that I have her only rule is treat them like they don't have a disability of any kind. So if they start to harass her or they say something that makes her uncomfortable, she lets them know.
She should respond like a person should.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So they know what to prepare for. Do you stop them at that point, or you just
So
let
yes,
it go? Okay.
Once she gives feedback, or if she is giving feedback and they're not noticing and it's more subtle feedback, I'll pause it. If she's given feedback, I'll pause it so that he can kind of plan how to respond, and then kind of resume. And usually I say, at some point you violated the social contract of interchange consent.
Right.
And when you're talking to people, there is consent. You have to be gauging constantly if they enjoy the conversation, if they're interested, if they want you to keep going, or if they need to say something themselves. So in regard to the flirting and learning those more subtle cues, learning to look for what I call like pleading eyes, when the person's eyes are kind of going back and forth, like, oh my God, when is this going to be over? Teaching them to look for breath patterns. If their breathing starts to become more rapid, they have anxiety.
Or fear.
Right? Either you are doing something wrong or they have somewhere to go. So
or they have
with
social
them.
anxiety too.
Quite possibly.
A lot of people do, apparently.
Right. Yeah. Then also things like if you move or gesture towards something and they move or look at what you're moving towards or gesturing toward, that's a good sign. If you move and they stay put, that might not be the best of signs. If you put your hand on her knee and she tenses up, she hasn't said no, but that's not consent. Her body language
no.
That's a
said
nonverbal.
no. So again, with always drawing back on consent. That is my main, boom, always.
And verbal and nonverbal. I think we've been talking a lot about this year because of all the Me Too stuff.
Absolutely.
There are a lot of ways that people are not consenting nonverbally.
And the reason it came up was we were talking about Louis C.K., where he went to a hotel room. 2 women came up with him. They were just going up there to hang out. And then he said, hey, should I take my dick out? And they said yes.
But their faces
probably said no, or they were laughing, or I don't know.
Or they were awkward.
But, who knows?
What do you say?
But he did.
And he did. And
that was a
got in
problem.
trouble.
So, yeah.
And
don't pull your dick out unless you're sure.
Verbally and non-verbally.
Verbally and non-verbally.
There we go.
Yeah.
So teaching about the subtle clues and consent. With consent, I call it the 4-pronged definition. Says yes, shows yes, understands the question, which means you need to ask it, and, right? And knows the consequences, which is also very relevant when I'm teaching about age and animals and why they cannot consent. Like children cannot consent to sexual things. Animals cannot consent to sexual things. Do they understand the question?
No.
A kid might understand the question, but can they possibly know the long-term consequences?
No.
Has the kid had the same sex ed that you've just been going through as an adult?
No.
You're right. So that's the kind of thing that that I really work in there with that.
That's good.
It's important.
It is very important.
Well, that sounds like an awesome model. It sounds like you're doing a lot of good for a lot of people.
I'm trying. I'm doing what I can. I have a couple of clients that have gotten to the point where we're now going out and I act as their wingman.
You wingman with them.
Yes, because again,
That's awesome.
I have to
awesome.
see that
You
the behaviors.
Or what's a hitch?
I have to see, again, in applied behavior analysis, if the behaviors are not being applied properly, then I haven't done my job.
Right.
Wingmanning, going there and getting to watch them interact with girls who are not actresses, getting them to watch their interactions, getting to watch on the faces of the people that they're interacting with what's going on.
Seeing the response.
And seeing his response to their reactions, all of that. I get to see all of that when I'm wingmanning. And then I can also come in with a cover story. Again, Pierce terminology, got to give them their credit there. Cover story is a simple excuse. So I'll come in and I'll be like, hey, dude, I've been looking for you. And I get them out of that situation.
Yeah.
Those types of things. And they know that I'm going to be able to provide them a cover story in the event that things go kind of wrong. So they're a little bit more comfortable and they're more willing to take that risk and take that step and try to flirt.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You're amazing.
Yeah.
So
I agreed.
how did you do with dating when you were younger? When it came to women, or no?
Is that okay?
Well, it started.
So not women. You're
it started.
gay, but...
Well, it started with women.
Oh, it did. Okay.
So dating for me was one of those things where I thought that I had to do it because everybody was doing it.
Everybody else is doing it. Why aren't you?
Right. So I would ask girls out, and luckily I was kind of a cute kid. And even though I was weird, I kind of asked the weirder girls out a lot of the time, and they would say yes.
That's
and
cool.
then we would date for like 2 or 3 days and have an explosive argument, or I would just
Like
decide,
every time.
Oh,
pretty
wow.
much, or I would decide that, like, you know, they were just unappreciative of me. A couple of them, like after 3 or 4 days, like cheated on me in middle school.
That quick?
Like,
Middle school.
That
That's
quick.
crazy.
so-
Maybe they didn't understand the rules of dating.
right.
Who knows?
I had, and I know the number because I've had to answer this before. I had 36 girlfriends before coming out at 15.
Wow. I had 2.
Wow.
Well, I didn't come out, but before I was 15.
I
Maybe
was
3.
a ladies' man who could not make it past like a couple days.
That's all you can survive.
Right. So then when I came out, dating became a little bit easier. And I think that people who are on the LGBT spectrum have had their own difficulties growing up, have been considered weird, have had social interactions punished versus reinforced. And so they're more open to accepting someone who is socially awkward, who does have some weird kind of behaviors, as long as they know that person's trying and listening and working towards it. I'm not saying everybody on the LGBT spectrum is open and accepting. That would be too much of a blanket statement.
Sure.
But I would say that for me, and in the experiences of some of my clients, and overall what I found in trends and literature, has been that LGBT groups are very accepting.
I've noticed that.
Yeah.
Like we have a couple of gay friends, and we've met a lot of people, and I have to say, most of them are very warm and welcoming people.
Yes.
Like, and they're accepting of you being different.
Yeah, and the more sex positive, the more open, welcoming, you know, like just in general.
In general, yeah. It's not even like even people we've met people who are poly and other different lifestyles. They seem to be very welcoming too.
There's this show on Netflix called Atypical. I don't know if you've seen it.
I love it.
It's so on my list.
I know.
Oh, no.
Oh my goodness. There's this one scene.
The first scene.
Where,
The first episode.
Well, there's a scene. I wasn't going to talk about
Not
the
the
first
igloo?
episode. No, that's the last episode, babe.
Oh.
But there was
Oh,
one
okay.
episode where he has a blow up with his girlfriend and he locks her in his closet.
Yeah.
But because she understands that people on the spectrum sometimes need breaks, like, so the dad walks in and he goes,
Where's your
"Where is your girlfriend?" She goes, "I'm in here, Mr. Peterson," or whatever his name is. And she's so like sweet and kind in the way she does it. She goes, he just needed some time away from me, so I'm in the closet. And he's like, "You can't lock your girlfriend in the closet." And he let her out, of course, but it was just a really interesting like interaction because she was touching his stuff. Like that's what happened, is he reacted to her putting her hands
Getting in his
on
territory.
everything, and he was just like, it overwhelmed him.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a good show.
I definitely
awesome.
want to.
It is binge worthy. We watched
We
it all
watched
in like
it in like a day or
two.
two. We were like, "Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
this is so amazing!"
It's hilarious, and
'Cause
and you learn a
sweet,
lot
you know?
about.
He's trying to date.
You actually learn a lot about autism watching the show because they really they bring his therapist into it.
Oh,
and,
yeah?
it's really awesome.
And he has those
I think-
missteps. You can
I
always
would-
take it off if you.
yeah,
if
you
it's
can take those
hurting.
off. I would suggest it. Like you should
Engage
watch it,
them.
and then I would suggest it for your clients. Like I think they could get a
yeah.
lot from it. Yeah, it's
Okay.
pretty amazing. Pretty
For
amazing
sure.
show.
I do try and tell my clients that, you know, it's a good idea to recognize that there's more exposure in media now to
There's a lot, yeah.
minoritized groups, and like it's healthy to watch people on TV who are representative of you. It gives you an increased sense of self-worth a lot of times, validation that you're a person too.
Especially if it's realistic, the way they're
Absolutely.
portraying it. Like I think there was a theme in the '90s of the magical kid with autism who would solve all your problems, kind of thing. That happened.
Well, and then you had Urkel.
Urkel. Is Urkel autistic?
He definitely presented as somebody who was on the Asperger's side, but still quite impacted.
Interesting. I never thought of that.
I've gone back and I like now binging the shows that I watched as a kid. I love nostalgia, and I think a lot of the people on the spectrum like to go back to things from when they were younger when they can. But I was binge watching Family Matters, and I was like, oh my gosh, Urkel is totally a spectrumite. Okay, I get this now. And then I'm watching it and I'm like, but he's treated as such a weirdo freak. And I'm like, but if he was on TV today, his show would be so different. And the closest character that I could find to Urkel on today's television is Sheldon from Big Bang Theory.
Sheldon's awesome.
And Sheldon is awesome, right?
Awesome.
Everybody's like, oh, Sheldon's awesome.
Yeah.
And so that just shows the difference in the trends because realistically speaking, they are the two most similar characters that have been on television.
And everybody loved Urkel. That's the thing.
People
Everybody
did love
him.
Urkel.
It's just the people on the show
go too far
Well,
and
on
not
the show-
understand social cues.
Right. People didn't understand where he was coming from, and they were kind of mean to him about it.
I was going to
Especially
say, the way
dad.
that people reacted to Urkel on the show.
Right. It was a lot more aggressive.
Intentionally, like, tricking him into leaving the house and then locking the doors behind him, things like that.
Yeah, that's never fun.
No, so they don't do stuff like that on TV these days, which is good. But honestly, that was kind of reflective of what a lot of people were doing with their children or their family members who had intellectual disabilities and autism, and it still happens today.
They weren't necessarily diagnosed in that era as much.
Yeah, or even after diagnosis, some parents they have a hard time with it.
Yeah,
and so they try and escape themselves whenever they can.
they try not to have their kid labeled as autistic.
That does happen sometimes too.
Yeah. Well, and some people just don't know how to work with it. I definitely see a generational shift, but we even know people where, like, in the old generation, having a child that's autistic, they were diagnosed now. But in that historic time, everybody just kind of said, "Oh, she's just different. She's just got issues. She's just different." And the whole time, like, looking back, it's like, "Oh no, she had autism. 100%, she had autism."
Yeah.
But there's a lot of stigma for people with any mental illness, to be fair. And we've only kind of more recently been accepting as a culture of people on the spectrum and understanding, or of any disability, to be fair.
Yep.
Yeah. It's pretty awesome.
For some people on the autism spectrum, I'd like to point out it's typically the ones who are what are referred to as higher functioning, but some of them don't even think of it as a disability. Some of them think of it as something that makes them unique and something that they can be proud of. There's a local activist that I've teamed up with to do some public speaking, and she is just so adamant that autism is part of what makes her awesome.
That's awesome.
And there are a lot of things about myself that I think back to when I was a kid and I was less socially focused and I was more focused on facts and things like that. And I was 5 years old and I could tell you that Carcharodon cacarius was the real name of a great white shark.
I still don't know
I was that kid. I would tell you about all the different theories of dinosaur extinction. I knew all of these different things.
Do you still know all these extinction level events?
So those things have stuck with me through the years. And people sometimes are like, wow, you know the most interesting and strangest things. And I'm like, yeah, because I was an interesting and strange child.
Because you love to study everything.
And that I am okay with. And my partner is not on the spectrum. We're engaged.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, congrats.
We've been living together for 2 years, and it's been, almost 2 years. And it's been, initially, it was kind of a struggle. My partner was new to the autism spectrum.
Was that your first time cohabitating with a partner?
In a long time. And prior to that, it was when I was much younger, and it was people that I was like, they need help. So even though I just met them and we're just starting to date, they can move in. Okay. As I got older, learned more and more about these types of things. No, I don't do that, especially after getting ripped off multiple times.
Oh, no. Yeah.
But so I kind of think it sounds like what you believe, or I don't know if believe's the right word, but basically that like given the right tools and the ability to kind of learn social cues and basically exist in the world, that people on the spectrum can just be unique parts of the average population.
Yes. Emphasis on the unique parts, but
but in a good way. I want to say
absolutely.
In a positive way. Like they can learn
Absolutely.
the same social cues that other people have. It may just take a few extra steps.
And for some, I would say that is not an achievable goal.
That's okay.
And for others, it is. And for those who can achieve it, knowing that it is achievable is a good starting place, believing in themselves. But no matter who the person is, no matter how impacted they are, perhaps the best skill that I honestly teach is mindfulness, is coping, is getting through. And I love sensate focus. Sensate focus in sex therapy.
What's sensate focus?
It's a touch type therapy. That's
lots of touch.
That initially avoids the vagina, the penis, the the boobs.
It's for intimate.
Yeah, and you can tell
it can also be done by an individual if they want to get in touch with themselves. So you focus entirely on temperature, texture, pressure. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to keep yourself focused in the present moment through temperature, pressure, and texture, and learn to stay in the moment and learn to kind of appreciate and acknowledge temperature, pressure, and texture, because you can learn a lot about yourself, your partner,
what feels good.
Absolutely. But that's not the goal, right?
Yeah.
The goal in sensate focus is more to observe than to, it's about feeling. Not about feeling
It's not
good.
about the finish.
And igniting your nerve endings. I always talk
Yes.
about it in terms of, like, I think a lot of times people are in their head, like in their cognitive head,
Right.
thinking about, like, is
That's why
this
we're
right?
talking
Should I do
about
this?
mindful.
Should I do not? And what it's trying to teach you is to be a little bit more in your body and your nerve endings.
Absolutely. And it's something that...
So you're not paying attention to the spinner.
Yeah, and you're not trying to get to
Exactly.
orgasm necessarily,
That's
which
right.
is why, because a lot of people, that's the end goal. We're going into sex to get an orgasm, and this
Right.
is just a unique way to re-experience sexuality in a much slower way.
Yes, you remove spontaneity in a way that actually increases spontaneity later.
Yep.
And it increases mindfulness. And so I do use acceptance and commitment therapy, which is pronounced ACT, in my applied behavior analysis interventions, and then also with my sex therapy clients. And then sensate focus I use with my sex therapy clients for partners. And then none of my current gentlemen who are individual clients getting applied behavior analysis have actually successfully at this point gotten a partner. We're working on it and we're getting there. A lot of them are getting close, which is really cool. We've only been open for 2 years and I didn't really have a caseload until about a year ago. So we're doing pretty good.
You're doing good.
But the sensate focus can be incorporated into applied behavior analysis. And that's something that I'm actually working on a paper about because it is empirically validated. It's actually been empirically validated longer than ACT. ACT studies have been since about, as far as I'm aware, the early 90s, whereas sensate focus studies started in the mid 60s.
With Masters and Johnson.
With Masters and Johnson.
I know them.
So there's been tons of proof that sensate focus is a very effective tool when done correctly.
Yeah, and understood.
And understood. A lot of people, again, they think that the goal is to achieve arousal or to feel good. And the goal is to feel temperature, pressure, texture. That's your goal.
To notice.
To notice, right? And to stay in the moment. Because the more you are in the moment, the more things like anxiety, so things like performance anxiety, right? Anxiety, fears, and also not just performance anxiety, but performance in general.
Yeah.
So when we are sexual with somebody And I think everybody's guilty of this. When you like a touch, you kind of move into it.
Oh yeah, you grind
and
into
you might
it, yeah.
like make a noise like
Oh
and
no.
you're trying to communicate to your partner that this feels good. Keep doing this, right? And so you learn to like make these motions or like arch your back to look like super sexy if you're going to be taking it from behind, those kinds of things. You learn to do those things. And those are performance related. Like honestly, arching your back, if the person's going to have their hands on your back and you're arching it, you might end up with a lower back issue.
So to go back to that sensate stuff, we're also teaching communication skills in a sexual situation.
And you're teaching it in a way that is not performance related. Like I'm not trying to show my partner what I need. My partner is going to be able to be so in the moment that they are able to recognize without me having to go, and make this giant motion. If I'm just like, they notice.
They notice.
Because they're there.
They're present.
If I like something, they're in the moment with me and they're able to kind of provide it more if that's what also is something that they want to do. And one thing that I love about the initial phase of sensate focus is the removal of trying to provide the other partner pleasure.
So it's not about pleasuring them.
No, that's why I said people who are trying to feel good through sensate focus, they end up messing it up because they're trying to find pleasure.
They're worried about performance.
So when you're being touched, though, you do kind of let your partner know if it's hurting or it's irritating.
Through a process called handwriting. Yes.
So you're trying to make it almost sounds like you're trying to make sex in a sensate focus more, or intimacy more mundane. So they're not overthinking it. It's because you're not worried about.
It's more in the moment.
Yeah.
Right. It's more but if you do it enough and you're in the moment, it makes it casual. So when you're in an actual intimate moment and you are trying to have sex.
Yeah, all of the skills are transferable. When
makes
people
it
get
easier, you're not going to be in your head.
That's right. It generalizes well.
When clients get it, like it like comes together and they're like, oh yeah, I see these skills. This is teaching us things about like how to stop overthinking it, how to kind of let go, how to get lost in the moment, and how to communicate well with each other, both verbally and non-verbally.
Yes, and it's really important to note that in sensate focus, after each round of the therapy, the partners are encouraged to write in a book about anything that kind of pulled them away from the moment, write in the book about anything that they noticed, and then they're also encouraged to communicate with each other what they experienced during that. And that communication is something that a lot of partners have never taken the time to do.
Talk about what you liked, what you didn't like.
Yes.
That's important. Yeah, I've heard people who never talk to each other about sex.
Yeah.
They just get in there and...
Right. Well, and you're also learning, so you might communicate new things that you never knew. Like, I really liked it when you used the back of your hand and your knuckle went along my hip bone.
Right.
I would never have known that because you've never used the back of your hand. Thank you, Sensate Focus, for teaching us to explore.
Thanks, Sensate Focus.
And to tell each other afterwards so you can repeat behaviors that work.
Nice.
That's right.
They're nice.
So Sensate Focus is something that I'm trying to bring into the applied behavior analysis community. Applied behavior analysis is something that I'm trying to bring into the sex therapy community. And it should be noted that a behavior analyst cannot be called a sex therapist under the behavior analyst title because they are not considered amicable with each other.
They don't work together.
At least as far as most people think. And that's because when people think, a lot of behavior analysts think of sex therapy, they think of purely psychodynamics. They think of purely, how do you feel? And
most sex therapists are more behavior-based, I've noticed. Like, I do all behavior-based treatment, and I still work with the cognitive and feelings, but like it's a lot of similar things where it's like, what are we going to act on? How are we going to shift this behavior?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why you're a good therapist.
That's why a lot of people, they'll see me for sex therapy, but then they'll see me for other things too, because they're like, you're at least giving us actions to take, whereas other therapists may just have them talk. And,
tell us how you feel.
And it's not that talking isn't helpful,
Sure.
but you still have to have action-oriented interventions.
to go along with the
Yes.
talk.
Or it feels like we just paid to talk, and like we always talk. What are we going to do?
Yeah.
Yes. So
Do something.
I know.
applied behavior analysis is very rigid in that things have to be empirically validated and measurable, observable. And so I like that I have that foundation, but I also, in learning about sex therapy and being in practicum in sex therapy, I see the potential for so much overflow between the two if done properly.
You should write the book about it.
That's what I'm trying to do, because
awesome.
I am the first board certified behavior analyst who has ever pursued certification as a sex therapist.
There you go.
So this is something that I do intend to write about. Right now it's a paper, but maybe someday a book.
Okay, cool.
All a book is a bunch of papers slammed together.
Yeah.
Well, so how? I mean,
we're actually running out of time.
Running out of time here.
That
was
sorry.
We could probably keep talking. Like, it's so interesting. But
it was really great information.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So
this has been the About Sex podcast. We've been talking with what's your
Nicholas
name? Nicholas Maio. I forgot his first name. Nicholas
Talking
Maio.
with Hitch for Autism.
Hitch for Autism. There you go.
Nicholas Maio.
Be sure to add us on Facebook, review us on iTunes, or send us your question to aboutsexpodcast@gmail.com. I'm Joshua Skirtu.
Before we end,
Hold
let's
on.
give our plugs.
I forgot.
So do you have any final plugs for how people can
contact
find you?
Yeah.
Absolutely. First, I'd like to emphasize applied behavior analysis works for any population, not just autism. So you can hit me up even if you don't have autism. We are reachable at www.empoweredcenter.com, all one word. And I can be reached by email at Nicholas, NICHOLAS, .Maio, M as in Mary, AIO, at empoweredcenter.com.
Sounds good.
Excellent. And then, of course, I've got my book, Helping Couples Overcome Infidelity, and I am doing a webinar with AAMFT in April about an advanced look at polyamory and kink lifestyles. And so join us if you're interested. And, of course, if you want therapy with me, it's www.therapistinstlouis.com. So I'm Angela Skirtu.
And I'm Joshua Skirtu.
Stay kinky, St. Louis.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.